It's Assistant Commissioner Neil Gagan, who's the National Manager for Organised Crime and Cyber in the Australian Federal Police. He's got a short statement to make and then he'll take questions afterwards.
Morning everyone, we're all right to go? Look, thanks everybody for coming. Look, today I'm going to give some details in relation to an AFP cybercrime operation investigation that occurred here in Sydney, which has exposed serious breaches of both domestic and international law, including allegations on the Commonwealth Weapons of Mass Destruction Act. Yesterday, the AFP conducted search warrant activity in Eastwood, and we subsequently arrested a 59-year-old male person who is appearing before Parramatta Bail Court very shortly. We allege that male person was living in Australia to conduct illicit trade deals on behalf of North Korea. This is a breach of both United Nations and Australian economic sanctions against North Korea. We'll be alleging this man, who is a nationalised Australian, acted as an economic agent of North Korea and conducted prohibited financial activities such as facilitating exports from North Korea in violation of both domestic and international sanctions. The AFP investigation in relation to this matter started earlier on this year after we received information from a foreign law enforcement partner in relation to a totally different matter. Through months of careful and methodical investigation, AFP officers have uncovered evidence this man was acting as an economic agent on behalf of North Korea to generate income for the North Korean government from abroad. In particular, we have evidence to allege he was attempting to transfer coal from North Korea to entities in countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam, and stress at this point that there is no evidence, in fact there's evidence to the contrary, that there is no involvement of those governments, nor there is any involvement of officials from those particular countries. And obviously trading in that manner is contrary to UN and Australian sanctions, and the AFP at this stage will not rule out further action or further charges in relation to those commodity type offences. During the investigation, we also uncovered allegations related to breaches of the Commonwealth Weapons of Mass Destruction Act. We'll be alleging in court this man was brokering the sale of missile componentry and technical expertise from North Korea to other international entities. We believe this man participated in discussions about the sale of missile componentry from North Korea to other entities abroad as another attempt to try and raise revenue for the government in North Korea, again in breach of the sanctions. Now, the missile componentry actually assisted in the guidance of ballistic missiles. For this activity, the man faces charges against the Commonwealth Weapons of Mass Destruction Act, and he's the first person ever to be charged in Australia with this legislation or these offences. Now, I know these charges sound alarming, but let me be clear, we are not suggesting there are any weapons or missile componentry that ever came to Australian soil, nor that we believe that we identify any immediate threat to the Australian community. And clearly, if we did, we would have went overt much sooner than what we did. We are alleging that all the activity occurred offshore and was purely another attempt for this man to trade goods and services as a way to raise revenue for the government of North Korea. This was his goal. His actions were all around trying to raise revenue for the government of North Korea. Through the actions of this man and the evidence we will put before the court, the AFP will saying this man is a loyal agent of North Korea, believing he was acting to serve some higher patriotic purpose. You know, clearly this is nothing like we've seen this before in Australian law enforcement. And I've got to congratulate the team involved, the specialist investigators who worked on an extremely politically and internationally sensitive investigation. Now, clearly, with the laying of these type of charges, we're well aware there is significant risk. However, the accuracy and the certainty of the evidence is such that I'm extremely confident that we have a very tight brief of evidence in relation to this particular matter, and the investigators that were involved are to be commended for the work they've put in relation to this matter. Look, the investigation's not over. Further charges are not being ruled out. But what I'll say is that this investigation shows the United Nations and Australian sanctions will be rigorously enforced in Australia. Any attempt to flout these sanctions through trade will not go undetected by the AFP or its partner agencies, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Brokering the sale of missiles and self-contained. Can you give us any information about what those other international entities are? Are we talking governments, terrorist organisations?
Look, they're not governments. I'm going to be clear about this. There's no governments or officials involved in any of this. This is black market 101. People trying to use the black market as a way to get things they shouldn't get hold of, and then also to receive revenue back in return. And that's the same with all the coal and the oil and everything else we'll be alleging, and also some fairly, you know, gemstones and the like as well. It's all about making money for the North Korean government.
So where were those international entities?
Well, at this stage, I'm only going to name Indonesia, like I already have, and Vietnam. I'm not naming any other countries.
In relation to the missile?
I'm not naming the country in relation to the missile componentry, and because the ongoing investigations in relation to that. It's at a sensitive statement, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. That being the case, we are working quite closely with our international law enforcement partners through the AFP's international network primarily. And I'll say at this stage, we're also working quite closely with the Australian intelligence community in relation to this particular investigation.
Are you able to say what job Brunel was doing in Sydney?
Sorry?
Are you able to say what job Brunel was doing in Sydney?
I'm not going to go into those details.
Just to clarify.
How much money he was able to make? Are we talking a significant sum?
There are some financial records that indicate well over $500,000 transfer that we're aware of, but we estimate that if these trades were successful, we'd be talking tens of millions of dollars.
And how many trades were successful?
But at this stage, there's none have been successful, but we've made allegations that 2 were attempted. As I said, there's strong evidence in relation to those, and there will also highly likely be further charges in relation to other attempts to facilitate similar type of activity.
Can you tell us a bit more about this? Can you tell us a bit more about this gentleman? How long has he been in Australia?
Yes,
where was he born? When was he recruited? And was he acting alone? Or?
Well, certainly he's been in Australia for approximately 30 years. At this stage, we are conducting further investigations in relation to exactly where he was born. Certainly we have...
North or south?
Well, that's where the inquiries are still leading us to. There are relatives in Australia that we are currently speaking to. There are ongoing investigations in relation to those particular people, and also investigations in relation to the broader people that he's been engaged with, not just here in Australia, but obviously also internationally.
What sort of time frame are we talking of these allegations?
Look, we'll be looking back to about 2008. Now, there's statutory limitations, matters that are before us as well in relation to some of these charges, so we're limited about how far we can go back. But we'll continue to do those inquiries over the coming months. We felt as it was important that we take the overt action that we did now to prevent actual further action taking place, and we're confident that we went action at the right time.
You said none of these transactions have been successful, so he had no success in 9 years?
Well, we're not sure about that. That's why we've charged him with 2 that we know were not successful.
He may have had
Well, that's totally supposition.
Right.
Were those 2 coal related, or was this missile componentry related?
They weren't missile componentry related. They were other goods and services.
How was he having contact with North Korea? Is this online? Is this phone calls? Is this spy type stuff?
Look, I'm going to say the gentleman was using some encrypted communication, but I'm not going to go into details of exactly what that was.
So we're clear that he was not successful in...
That's correct.
...brokering the sale of any of the missile stuff?
Well, that definitely in relation to the missile componentry, and I'll be very clear that it's not missiles, it's missile componentry.
But you mentioned a $500,000 transfer. Was that for commodities trade?
Look, that's still going back some time. That's some part of the ongoing inquiry in relation to that particular transaction.
Has he made admissions?
The gentleman spoke to us, but I'm not going to go into details as to what he said.
You said you're speaking to family. Are any of those, are you expecting to lay charges against any family members or anyone in the network?
Look, I'm not ruling it out. The matter is ongoing. The continuation of the investigation is quite complicated, clearly. It will be a matter of months or weeks before we're actually in a position to go any further with it.
What are the penalties for these?
Yeah, the sanctioned offences are 10 years imprisonment, and the weapons of mass destruction offences carry 8 years imprisonment. Now, I'll say that legislation, as I said, hasn't been used before. It was enacted in 1995, so it's fairly dated legislation. And obviously, with legislation like that, you know, we work with the Attorney General's Department to make sure it's still contemporary.
Will you be alleging he had direct contact with the North Korean regime? He was working on behalf of their government?
I'm not going to go into those details. That's a little bit too sensitive at this stage, but I think the facts speak for themselves.
How likely is it that he was acting alone, or can you give us an idea of whether you are expecting that there are others involved?
Well, I think I've already answered that question. I'm not going to rule anything in or out at this stage. The investigation's ongoing, and we'll see how we go in the coming weeks.
You said 2008. How many allegations will there be made against him?
Well, we're not sure at this stage. I mean, we know that there's certain activity in 2008 that we're suspicious of. So we will basically work forward from that date to ascertain whether or not there's been any other actions occurring.
Up until very recently, like we're talking contemporaneously?
We're talking this year.
Just a
Well, the weapons of mass destruction is in relation to the componentry for the missiles, and the other two offences are both in relation to trade of goods and services. So the Commonwealth sanctions and the UN sanctions. Correct.
You said it's unique, obviously.
It's unique.
And also that we shouldn't be alarmed, that the Australian public should be alarmed. Just describe this investigation in your experience.
Well, it's unique as far as we're concerned that we've never charged anyone with a matter such as this in relation to breach of UN sanctions assisting the North Korean regime. I mean, that's the unique part of it. The safety issue is that whilst the allegation we're making is in relation to missile componentry, there's absolutely no evidence. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary that there was nothing in Australia that would cause the Australian community harm.
What is componentry?
It can be 1,000 different things. It's in this particular issue, it's a piece of software basically that assisted in guidance.
Surely there must have been acting as an authorised agent of a North Korean government agency if he is purporting to be able to access missile componentry, presumably made by a government factory. There's no private supplier of that in North Korea. So look, are fairly direct, yeah?
The evidence suggests that there has been contact with high-ranking officials in North Korea, but I'm not going to go into any further detail in relation to that.
Is the AFP worried about repercussions from North Korea after this arrest?
Look, I think as per normal, my officers particularly take certain precautions. The safety and security of our building, as you see here when you come in, is the highest priority of the Commission and the highest priority of all senior officers. Obviously we asked, besides my face, which is obviously well known in the public, that any other officers that you've taken photos of, that you just be discreet in relation to that. The AFP, as it always does in this time of year, will be putting out a cyber security alert to its staff in relation to the protection of our own systems. That's actually gone out in the last couple of minutes. So, we're not naive enough to think that there may potentially be some action, but we're also fairly confident that we can secure our systems accordingly.
So after you had the tip-off, what kind of surveillance operation are we talking? Has this been weeks, months?
It's been months, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, obviously, because I don't want to give up our methodology, but it's been a very complex investigation over a considerable period of time. And again, the investigators involved, need to be really congratulated for the methodical way they've gone around this. These type of investigations aren't always as flash as some of the other ones, but the end result is a significant win for the Australian community and the Australian government.
We're usually here talking about cocaine or ecstasy. When you first saw this, missiles, weapons of mass destruction, North Korea, what did you think?
Well, I suppose, the first question that goes to your mind is, is the evidence there sufficiently to charge the people? And, being cynical that I am as a fairly senior law enforcement officer, I asked some fairly hard questions about that. We, as we do with these type of charges, sought some advice from the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecution around the charges being sufficient to run. Their advice back is that if we can provide the evidence we said we've got a very, very strong chance of a successful prosecution.
Just to be clear on the charges.
Is this guy a spy?
No, look, we think he's acting as basically as an economic agent on behalf of North Korea. There's nothing to suggest he's doing anything but that. He's doing it out of a patriotic purpose. I think at the end of the day he would sell whatever he could to make money back for the North Korean government. I think it does go to show that the sanctions are biting. The fact that we've got people involved in these type of activities means that I think the sanctions are actually having some effect.
Have you got record of any transfers by him?
I'm not going to go into those details.
Just to be clear on the charges, is it 4 that he's facing in total?
It's 6 in total, and you'll have those details provided to you shortly. Okay, thanks everybody.